you look at the services that you're receiving is far from what you're paying. Primarily because when you take your car out of your driveway, you're hitting a whole lot of potholes, you're going through stormwater blockages, the verges are not kept well. You get an incorrect bill, you can't get anywhere with that bill. So what are you paying your rates for? No services. So from a financial perspective, I mean, the city now has prioritized its budgets in other issues. 30% is corruption and maladministration. What is the way forward from a financial perspective? Auditor General has said there's qualified audit reports. Oh. Do we really look at changing the personnel, changing the way the Treasury Department operates? What is the solution? Because ratepayers are complaining.
There's a couple of key issues. Firstly, I mean, we've spoken about it a couple of times over the last few months. Municipalities in general, based on the audit reports that have come out, over 70% of them are qualified reports. So that's a big issue. To put it into perspective, just the other day, the Auditor General came out with a finding on national departments and state-owned enterprises. Over the past 5 years, irregular, fruitful and wasteful expenditure. Fruitless and wasteful expenditure. 124 billion rands over the past 5 years. Countrywide. Mm-hmm. So this is national departments and state-owned. And if you include PRASA is regarded as a level 2 institution, so it's not a public, non-scheduled 2 public entity. If you include that, it goes to 135 billion rands. That's a massive amount of money over 5 years that's gone to irregular, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure. Now, imagine when you're adding the municipalities. They've had massive amounts. eThekwini has been a disaster over the last couple of years. Absolute disaster. From being a really top-notch municipality 15, 20 years back, it's deteriorated in a really bad way over the last 10, 15 years in particular. And it's across the board in terms of many municipalities throughout the country. Personnel is one big issue. You need to get the right skills. And I saw recently there was an article that they're trying to get some of the retired engineers back into service and you need to get the right skills. Every second day, whether you're driving in Crescent Street or Hartley Road, Randalls Road, St. Thomas Road by the mosque or around there, there's how many water leakages that takes place. It's ridiculous. And what's that resulting in? Over 50% leakage. That means there's lost revenue that's just gone by. 50%. That's unacceptable. So you need to firstly, the expenditure needs to be reined in and put into the right places instead of spending so much on wage bills. And again, this is going to be another issue we're facing over the next few months, is that the unions are talking about a 12% countrywide public sector looking for a 12% wage increase, whereas the wage bill in the government budget is one of the biggest expenditures around. Obviously, interest is another big factor, but the wage bill is a big amount. You're not getting value for money in terms of what you're spending on the wage bill. And that's the big issue, not only in public sector, in terms of nationally, in terms of state-owned, but across the municipalities as well. And you need to rein in expenditure. One thing nationally, the government has done relatively okay. And you got to hand it to the late Tito Mboweni when he was appointed again in 2018 when things were going really south. And then also the recent finance minister, Inigonwana. They've actually helped the public sector wage bill. They've managed to keep it sort of below inflation or around inflation over the last few years. To put it into perspective, in the last, if you go back to 2020, the wage bill, 2000, the wage bill as a percentage of GDP was around 10%. It peaked in 2020 at 14% of GDP. It's now come back again to around 12.5%, 13%. So you can see they're slowly managing that. But if unions come in and want to push another 12%, you can't have it. It's ridiculous. You need to have service delivery improvement, and government is proposing, I think, around 3 to 4%. So you're going to get, if they get 4 to 4.5%, I think it'll your at least the budget will be reasonably well maintained, and it will help in terms of bringing down our debt costs. Debt for us is the biggest issue. This country faces in terms of our wage bill is one big issue, and our debt service cost is another big issue. We've got 400 billion of debt servicing costs. That's 20 cents per rand that just goes towards paying towards interest. It's ridiculous. The amount that can be used towards healthcare, policing, and the like. It can happen. Coming back to your point with whether this thing can turn it on, I think it can turn it on. You're slowly seeing in the last couple of months, you talked about maybe which are good departments. I can say, and I think while crime is horrendous nationally, and I mean, you just see the murders that's taking place in the Eastern Cape and these places, these mass murders alike. But KZN, which is a real hotspot in terms of crime, there actually been some improvement in terms of policing activity over the last 3-4 months. Go and see the activity between the police and some of the private security companies over the last 4 months, and see the impact they've had in terms of, there's been a number of kidnappers, cash in transit heists, those guys that have either been taken out or have been arrested. Now, some politicians will throw a spanner and talk about maybe it was not the right. I'd rather be safe in my house and knowing that the police are doing the best they can do to take out those that are harming everybody else. And if it means having to use certain force to protect the others, then they should do it. Obviously, try and do it within the parameters of the law and making sure that there's no, we don't want to have vigilantes and that to happen. But at the end of the day, crime has gone out of control. And sometimes you have to take hard decisions and hard actions to try and rein in and bring it back to this thing. So I think there is certain areas that are improving. Other areas where I think slowly we are seeing improvement nationally, not municipalities. Municipalities still it's going to be a while to get that. But nationally, you're slowly seeing some of the SOEs. When last we had load shedding? Been a long time, over 200 days. Yes. Which shows that both if the public and the private sectors work together, there can be an improvement in certain areas. Transnet, why is still a disaster? But from November last year, when we had in Durban Port, massive backlogs, huge backlogs. I mean, a lot of the retailers were waiting for stock for December, and they were under pressure because they, still sitting in containers in the port because they were not getting through. Slowly, there's been about a 20% apparently increase or improvement in terms of efficiencies in the ports and the like. So I think you're slowly seeing that. The one last area I want to highlight. Municipalities and the councillors you have talked about, that they have a role to play in how they do it as well. But we as ratepayers and the like also have roles to play. See what the likes of Overport Ratepayers Association, the likes of Musgrave Ratepayers Association like. These associations in the last, especially in the last 2 years or so, you have seen they are making a positive impact. I live in Musgrave, Eunice in UT in the Asheville area. They're like, yes, there is still issues. I mean, we're talking about the breakdown, but they are trying to have an impact in terms of holding the councillors, trying to hold municipalities accountable. And you have to hold the appointed officials accountable. That's you got to keep on driving them, keep pushing them, reporting it and getting it. I think a collective between all the various municipalities have to really jack up a hell of a lot to get to a reasonable efficiency. They're way behind what you would deem as being an acceptable level of service. And to get to that, those that are employed by the municipality, there are key performance measurements that they must be put across, and they must be held accountable towards it. If you don't perform, you don't get paid, or you don't get paid a certain bonus or whatever it is, and you must move on. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen. It's easier said than done, but in the private sector, it's done. Make no mistake. Private sector, come in there, you have your KPIs, you didn't perform. Okay, sorry, you're either not going to get, there's no bonus. And then secondly, potentially a reduction in your salary or a demotion has to happen in the public sector. And that's one of the real ways that can drive change. I think lastly, and it's an important point, is I had a couple of last points as well. Municipalities are highly indebted. It's a big issue. While ratepayers are paying, there is still a culture in many municipalities throughout the country where people are not paying their electricity, not paying their rates. Who's the biggest, one of the biggest debt owing defaulters to ESCOM? Municipalities. Municipalities.
Because they're not getting paid and they're not paid.
Because they're not getting paid and they're not paid. But municipalities also in many extents, if you look at ratepayers,
squandering the money.
Look at Itiquini. Itiquini, they're receiving over 95% of their rates. So they can't complain that they are getting paid. Majority of the people are still paying their rates. They must pay it on to whoever they're owing the money to, whether it's ESCOM, whether it's on the water side and the like, and they must spend it. The issue is spending needs to be in the right areas. Infrastructure particularly needs to be focused on. We've got an aging infrastructure across many areas in the country that needs to be addressed